So, yeah, I began work in the early 80s in Canberra at the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies as a darkroom operator. So I began working there, and it was after several months I really sort of really started looking very carefully at these archival pictures which were taken in the late 19th century and of Aboriginal people in chains and some sort of fairly brutal images of and constructed images of Aboriginal people being forced into studio situations to be distributed as postcards, and the whole sort of mentality of government photographers being sent out to photograph dying races. So there was an incredible. So I really started looking at all this work, and I started. It really sort of had a profound effect on me. Really, I started thinking about the attitudes and the sort of attitudes of those times, and the way they went about imaging indigenous people, and it was shocking. It was done in such a terrible way. It was a very I in fact always call it a very subjugated and also sort of an invasion of people as well, in the way they portrayed Aboriginal people in the country for their own purpose. And of course this started me questioning the roles of photography too, the way the medium is used, the way it can be a very persuasive, the persuasive nature of photography as a very powerful medium. And then I sort of started thinking, well, this is another part of that sort of propaganda machine. These are images constructed for their own purpose from a different era to try and support their evidence of dying races, which in fact they were killing races. So again, it was all part of that propaganda machine, and so the way in which that was done, I really started to question the whole role of the way these images were perceived in general society. And of course, of its persuasive nature, it obviously has a profound effect too on the way people receive those images and which support those ideas by governments to say, this is we're either depicted as the broken passive victim or the noble savage. So I really started investigating real sort of the attitudes of the time and attitudes of photographers, and the way that if I was going to be an Indigenous image maker, how I would use the medium, and the way that I could go against what was an inaccurate recording of Aboriginal people from the previous century. Mm-hmm. So I set myself sort of a fairly large task of wanting to photograph the truth. And of course, by the early mid 80s, I didn't have really real direction in photography. But after I started investigating these attitudes and questions, and I began to, I found the genre of documentary photography, which, and I really liked this field of photography in a way that was appealed to me as a very highly ethical field of of its ideals of seeking the truth.
It was art with a social conscience.
Yes, art with a social conscience, without a doubt. And so I began that task, and I guess some 30 years later, those ideals and my motivations have never changed, and so I remain very committed to that ideal of portraying our people in a way that yes, we should be and are the true storytellers of our own culture. And,
yes.
So it's only really then that we can say this: we own this culture, we own this history,
because it's your it'll take a while
Oh,
for your true stories told by you to replace the fake reality that's been imposed for 150 years by the totalitarian oligarchy.
Without a doubt. And as I say, there was some 150, 100 years of previous
Premeditated propaganda.
Propagandist kind of portraying of its indigenous people for their own purpose, and that's when I first started that sort of that question of the constructed history and of a history of one that suits themselves.
Yes.
Which in fact, as I said, some 30 years later, we're still stuck in that same period of this Australia's denial of its own history.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I continue to do educate, hopefully, and the whole idealism of that really is about changing social attitudes.
Yes.
Which is again the idealism of documentary and done in a very ethical manner as well.
I wanted to say two things. I saw a quote from Oscar Wilde who said, "If you want to tell people the truth, either make them laugh. You have to make them laugh, or they'll kill you."
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
And then remember we were talking about William Ricketts, the sculptor. And I remember, and there's a little documentary about him that I believe it might be available on DVD now. But he said that his main goal in making all these beautiful sculptures of the indigenous people of the Central Desert there, and carved out of or made out of tree trunks, where it's turning into the people holding the beautiful animals. They're very angelic looking. But he said his primary goal was to educate white Australia about who the indigenous people of Australia really are, so that they know the truth of it's very similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah. As I said, a big task, but I truly believe that, and certainly all the other great Australian documentary photographers that I've met and known over 20 years, I guess. Have become good friends as well. I sort of regard us as those humanitarians in a way.
Yes.
We've devoted a life to a high purpose without no personal gain whatsoever, in ways of being able to even to survive and live properly. So we've had to sort of do other things to help support our projects. To work on a higher purpose, of course, but I mean, I wouldn't change a thing, because we become totally committed to this idealism, which is again about the truth. So we need to educate people that this is our stories, this is the way we feel in this era, and as documentary photographers, it's so important to document and record and express our era. And I think that's basically a general philosophy of most photographers anyway, but certainly becomes a high goal of all documentary photographers. I've believed in that process for a long time, and I knew it was going to take a long time, and hopefully within my life, I hope I can just in a way make it a bit clearer and an easier path for understanding for generations ahead.
Who would some of these other friends of yours that are the top Australian documentary photographers be?
Well, it started, the other Australian photographers, it first began with when we did the original project from the Institute, actually, in the mid-80s.
Is that when you were the archaeological documentary photographer?
It was the same period,
Okay.
And we did a project called After 200 Years book. It's called After 200 Years, and so it talked about, that involved about 19 or 20 photographers that travelled through all different parts of Australia and photographed communities, and it was the first time ever that kind of a project ever happened. But what important about that was the manner in which it happened. It was done in a very collaborative way with Aboriginal people, rather than being subjugated to be involved or forced into that sort of situation. So that was really interesting part of that, and the editor Penny Taylor done an incredible job to bring that approach to Australian photography in that period.
What year was that?
That was in 1985. It
Okay.
began for 1988, which was the bicentenary celebrations of Australia, of course, and that was sort of a political point, of course, for Aboriginal Australians, but and we didn't participate in, of course, very few of the bicentenary celebrations of white Australia, but nevertheless, I thought at that time, and knowing the true power and you know the nature of photography, that the benefit of being able to document our community in that period was very, very important, so I chose to participate in it for that one and only sole reason. You know, some 25 years later, that body of work has become quite a very famous sort of collection with our people. So I'm glad I made those decisions to do that at that time, because I understood that, you know, from the history and the knowledge of the way in which photography is used.
Yes. Now, would you say that I'm speaking as someone who I've known of you for a while, but I'm not very familiar with your actual photography. But if I were, I wouldn't have to ask this question. But would most of your work be of people, as opposed to landscapes and stuff?
Yes. Basically, I really started from a very true documentary style of people and the environment, and which dealt with very specific cultural issues. Again, it was about seeking that truth to educate people about hopefully you know, changing social attitudes. So,
would you do this so much through like one photograph that said the whole story, or like a series of photos that told the story, or
a series of photographs? I mean, in the mid '80s, we began in what we call a true photo essay form, and we worked in photo essays, and so there was a series of photographs that really had sort of an extended narrative to the whole piece, and I still work very similar today, actually. But you know, today a lot of people try to hopefully an image can. Well, the question is, can an image stand on its own today? So we try and, you know, sort of meld that into a better technique today, but essentially still that photo essay storytelling form.
Yes, you're in a world where people are increasingly saturated with images of all coming at it from all different directions, and it's such a highly refined science of attacking people with images for, you know, the TV and all different forms of mass media, and how images affect the brain differently than like text and stuff like that, and so the idea of a photo essay, does that sort of exclude, like, are you trying to be able to tell the story without any text or talking at all? Like if people just saw the photos with no words or talking?
When I began, I first began in, and that was, I think, a period of photography really, that we try to make a lot of those images stand on their own individually, as well as being part of that bigger narrative of the photo essay. But so we didn't deal with much text in that earlier days, but certainly now, and you know, certainly in the you know, the 1990s and early part of the 21st century now, it's becoming more important that we will either put that sort of more word and more text and image that combines to tell a bigger story, and I think becomes a very powerful. I mean, you're dealing with two languages, and
Yes.
so it becomes quite a powerful way if it's used cleverly. I think you have to use text and image very in a clever way.
Absolutely, and every person, and here again, you're combining the elements that you'll have available to you moving into film as a domain of creativity.
Yeah. Well, I think when I say about the use of clever text for the images, I think it's about using sort of non-visual information, so we don't actually tell people what the picture is.
Yes.
Exactly. We tell the story that surrounds the image.
Yes.
And which is really important. And of course, at the end of the day, we really need people to be able to sort of take that step closer to the print on the gallery wall, and understand it a bit more by the use of this language, in being able to hopefully bring well, hopefully they will have a better interpretation of that. So yeah, clever use of that other language and text, and being able to tell a bigger story to what the image is about in a way, and so it's actually, in a way, I consider it a very complex way of storytelling, really. Yet we try to deal with the simplicity of the image and the message within that text. So it's actually quite hard to do when we now see our work in documentary photography being hung on gallery walls, which in fact in the 80s there was no such outlet, and no sort of indication that it would ever sort of be giving its rightful position aside and be part of mainstream art.
Yes.
So it was. It's really good that we've, after all these years, we've become recognised as being a part of that artful practice.
Yes. Now let me ask you about, you spoke of Ansel Adams as being a major influence on you. Did he take, I only know him through his photos of like Yosemite and places like that, but did he do a lot of photos of people, or have sort of like the social conscience kind of approach that you're involved in?
Well, I mean, he was sort of
an environmentalist.
And he was sort of titled one of the sort of fathers of photography in a way. His technical excellence, and developed certain, technical and technique, which is used by photographers all over the world today. So his influence is incredible. But basically. Of course, first we got to know him as an environmentalist, and he showed these absolute beautiful images of country that in his part of the world, in California, that he wanted to protect. So he was very much again, an environmentalist. He had a real purpose to the way he went about making pictures, to create again that understanding to help people protect those very places. So. It was great influence, the way he actually used his craft, and he very much developed a highly skilled area of craft, what he brought to his work, as well as those philosophical ideals that he was working with. So he was very influential to many photographers right around the world.
What would be a couple of his sort of technological things that people use now?
Yeah, well,
are these composition techniques, or
not so much composition techniques. It's really about the technique that what we do with chemistry and film, and trying to craft that sort of perfect neg.
Yes.
In a way.
Did he always work only with black and white?
Always with black and white. Yeah, I think he did a little bit of colour, but it's not really known. But of course he's black and white has become world famous, but he also developed an exposure system called the zone system, with the help of a friend, and but he was and he regulated that because he was a very talented musician as well.
Was he?
Yeah, a very talented musician, and so he was. He sort of likened his approach and developed a zone system of scales and zones that we see in our reflectance of the world, and different tones of the landscape, and he likened that to the musical scale, and the way we look at things and be able to relate a certain density on a neg to a certain given tone in the ways light is reflected off it.
That's very interesting. I never knew this about him.
Yeah, very, very clever, very a technician, a very highly creative technician, in fact, to be able to bring that to and make it a beautiful craft.
Did he ever Did he ever venture into film?
No, he never ever did. No, he was always interested in the still photograph.
Now, if you could take 30 seconds and just contrast, just brainstorm about the difference between what it is to someone that you're presenting an image to that's one still image, stationary in time, whereas opposed to a moving image of, say, like even the same thing but actually moving in time, like someone's face. Or I mean the difference in, I mean, I guess I'm asking you, I'm thinking about this in my mind at the same time. It's a whole different sort of psychological process that's going on. But a lot of it would come from what would it be our expectation of where the movement is going?
Yeah, without a doubt. And but really for me, the still image, you know, and there's in the early 80s too. I mean, there was many, well, not many, but there was a few different schools of thought. I was always influenced by American photography, and there was a few schools of thought going around at that particular time that, so it was, you know, we sort of I investigated a lot of those different approaches as well. And but you know, as far as the still image, it is about that moment in time that we was absolutely sort of fascinated with.
Well, it's actually timeless.
Yes, exactly. And the moment you press that shutter, that's it. It was things we once seen. So it's a fascinating concept of the way we relate photography. It's always about time. Not only in the final capturing of the image, but you know, the way we press the shutter, the way the instruments are made to capture that slice of time that'll in fact never ever happen again. So it was I love that sort of concept of being able to hopefully capture something in fleeting moments.
And you're capturing it and preserving it.
Without a doubt,
so that people can reflect on it without it changing or moving.
Yeah.
And looking at a still photo or even a painting for that matter is more like it probably shows people about their own creativity as it sort of scans and cycles around and processes the image, and we think about it and reflect upon it rather than the sort of the active entrainment that you get with like a technology like television or something like that. And also the fact that when you're looking at a photo, like on a printed on a paper or a print, you're looking with ambient reflected light as opposed to an electronic beam that's aimed at you from cathode ray tubes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's that fascination with the whole craft of image making. It's about that time. It's always involved in time, and it's so fascinating. And Ansel Adams once said that it's much harder to make a masterpiece in photography than it is to do in painting, and it's so true because you have to consider so many elements of what you need to. What I've always called what you've got to bring to the craft, what you bring to your art, your craft and your art. What do you bring? You know?
I picked up your book, and one of those things is you need to be through half of your life before you can be a good photographer.
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yeah, well, Ralph Gibson, the great photographer, once said that. He said that it takes half a lifetime to be a photographer, and so essentially what he was talking about the experience of life and really what I've always considered, okay, who is this artist, who is this photographer, who is this image maker, and what do they bring to the work? And in my work, especially in the Aboriginal movement, it's about bringing that, I bring a unique perspective of, well, it's an informed experience as an Aboriginal person.
Yes, because you're not from outside doing photo documentaries about something. You're actually telling your own story.
Without a doubt.
Which is so important. I mean, it's very powerful.
Yeah. So it's a very unique perspective in a way, and it's from what I call a lived experience. And that's really important because we have to not only document this era that we are in and give expression to that, but we've got to bring our emotion as well as the expression to this period as well. But the amount of elements and your approach, and I think your approach to your work is everything. It has to do with everything in your approach and what you actually bring to the work. Photography, as in all art, is about ideas and the execution of those ideas. At the same period, if I can make it a bit clearer with Western, was in the 1930s they made a group of photographers called the F-64 group in California, and another great photographer was Edward Weston, who for me was very influential in a way that his approach was very, very interesting as well, where his approach was almost like what I call Zen photography. He was very much interested, same as the group, but Western in particular was always interested in the essence and the beauty of the subject itself that lay before his camera. Again,
as opposed to
the other school, or maybe of Walker Evans, who clearly placed himself as the centre, as the artist.
Yeah, because
to give an expression to the subject.
In his photos, you'd notice that it was him that took it.
Yeah, yeah.
Rather than but I like the one you were talking about, the Eben Weston.
Oh, very. Look, he's. I mean,
his
idea. Approach and idea was something that spoke very loudly to me, and I was very. It's about this essence of what our eyes see, and the way we need to bring that into its final print. The various stages of photography about exposing the negative and knowing the zones and tones and being able to interpret that to see exactly what we saw.
Yes.
And then even into the psychological part of that, which is Western's idea about, it's about the thing itself. It's about the beauty and essence of what lied before your camera.
And then that ties in with like the physics of light and optics and the human visual system and all this stuff.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And I mean, those are two men in the same school. The school of photography that I'm really from.
What would you call that if that had a name?
It'd be hard to give it a name actually, but it's almost a zen of photography, as I say. It's it deals with that purity of subject, the purity of essence of the subject, into its final execution of a beautiful print of something of beauty that describes the very essence of the thing itself.
Another thing with all this is also the similarity, but also the difference in how individual people perceive the same thing. And you can't ever really see through anyone else's eyes. But we're all very similar, but everyone's uniquely different. Yeah. And so trying to understand or second guess or appreciate the difference when different people see the exact same thing that you've created and what their difference in perceptions are and stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, the number one key element or essence of photography itself is all about vision. It's about vision, of course, and for me it's been two words: vision and craft. But vision is this ability to see, and that's a key word, to see.
And that has so many connotations in English. Yeah. It has to do with understanding and comprehension, and not just visual perception. Yeah.
And but I mean, that's the great thing about the medium of photography too, is that 10 photographers can stand on a hill and take of the same subject and take entirely different images and pictures, and that to me is just that's a pretty exciting thing to happen. I mean, and this is what photography gives us, this ability to look at the way other people see and vision their world.
Mm-hmm. I know that from experience, because my partner Elizabeth and I, for 5 years, we both do massive amounts of still photography, and we would always be taking photos of the same location. But I was always amazed at how her photos would be so different from mine, and I'd go like, "This is so cool that she saw that, and I saw this," and that's very, very, very
Oh,
interesting.
it's fascinating. It's really exciting to see, and yeah, this is what photography gives us, and so hopefully, but I think you know, in the modern world we are today with digital technology, I think we've lost a few of those steps of seeing.
Yes. Now,
Um,
tell me about that for a few minutes. About the now, I asked Liz Dombrovskis if Peter was still alive, if he would be shooting digital, and I wasn't sure. She reckoned that he would because all his friends that were still alive had switched to digital or were using digital in addition to film. There's a guy named Rob Blakers. Do you know him?
oh yeah, I've heard of. I've seen a lot of
He
his
sort
work
of
actually.
does a lot of wilderness stuff, and he's using digital and film still. But
Yeah.
but tell us about the what have we lost in the transition to digital?
We've lost a few steps in that process of image making. I have no I have no objection to digital whatsoever. I think whatever instrument and tool that you use, just as long as you get to that same point of what you wanted to respond to or express, really the tool is really irrelevant in a way because we're dealing with this vision and the ability to see and see differently.
But it's
So
lessened the amount of creative elements of control, right?
it's the method. It's the method in the steps. I mean, I come from a school, of course, that dealt with a very much a craft, and of course that's all about procedure and technique and delivery, and to get to a certain point. But I mean, if you create an instrument and put it on the table, and you say this is an instrument. It's been invented to be manipulated.
Yes, it can't just
What
do.
are you going to do?
It can't just sit there on its own.
What are you going to do? You're going to manipulate with that instrument. But if you use it in the same steps, I mean, you know, we got to really concentrate on our vision and our seeing. That's what brought us to photography, the way we saw our world, the seeing. The step I'm talking about is, for starters, is the LCD screen on the back of a digital camera.
Yes.
You know, it's more scan see. Whereas before, on a film camera, I see before and respond before I photograph.
Yes.
So, you know, we're losing steps. That's what I'm saying about those steps.
So
And
this is
that's
in
an
the
essential step I think we've lost.
Yes.
Or I've lost as I see. You
Yes.
know, and,
this is in the act of creating the image to begin with.
yeah, the act of making pictures and responding to your world, and so I think I mean, if I know that I could probably work well with digital, but I'd have a different camera where I'd be able to operate the aperture ring and the timing with the shutter speed and use it in a very manual sense, and I'd cover up the LCD screen.
Yeah, I never use mine. Only
No, this would teach me to see first, and not scan see. So I think
there's another little thing in the era of digital photos. So many people you see, as soon as they take a photo, they look at it on the LCD. And I only got digital like 4 years ago, and so I'm used to like not even seeing the photo till like a long time later when the film gets developed, and like that whole thing, and the whole and how about the word taking a photograph? You know, I think it's funny
well,
that
just before we go into that,
Yeah.
it's about the LCD screen and that. I think that's a really key step. And I mean, I would cover my LCD screen because it'll force me to see, because that's the way we came to photography. We wanted to see and see differently. So we lost that in part of that process. So I'm sure I'd make it. I would limit yourself in digital technology in order to gain skill.
yes,
You know, and I think I think it was Ellie Durbett actually, what the great photographer, American photographer, said that if it's too easy, you get sloppy in technique. And I totally agree. But if you can keep your approach and your technique and your you know your concept of seeing first, I'm sure there'll be much better digital photographers around today.
Yes, I think I find with myself, because I'm mainly photograph nature, because I'm photographing something that I love for its beauty, you know. So it makes it really, it's like photography is such a second nature to me that it's all one process. Like, I'm not obsessed about doing photography, but I love to do it as a way to share. It's not sharing the real thing with other people, but it's a simulation that can give people sort of like a taste of a place that they haven't seen, or a moment in time at a special place or something. But I was asking what you thought of the word take, as opposed to it's a bit it's like you're taking it, but really you're sort of like expressing a photograph.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, what you're really essentially doing is you're responding.
Yes, that's the best word.
Yeah, in your seeing, and so I think that sort of process to me is, and I've always used the term picture maker.
Yes, that's very good.
You know, because when you have this instrument of the camera and you look around you and you've got a whole panorama of events in front of you, right from the very start, you have to know exactly where to put that frame. So you're constantly thinking of this whole process about the way you're responding to certain parts of this panorama in front of you, about this, you know, in terms of vision and the way you see. So, so right from that very beginning and concept of approach and image making, you're responding to frames and events and incidents and light and shade and all these things that are happening that you respond to. So for me, that's all part of picture making. And certainly in documentary photography, when we all have to consider too the event that's happening in front of us too, if we're photographing people within the landscape, or the way people are placed in the landscape, or something's happening with people within that picture. So we're responding to it too, and it takes great skill. And the most important thing is, which Ansel Adams said actually, it's know exactly where to place yourself. So part of all that, all these decision makings and what comes before that is what you bring to the work, who you are, your beliefs, your religion, your culture, your identity, all these things that you bring to the work goes into that, you know, 1/60th of a second to make that image, the way you responded and saw your world that was in front of you at that time. So it's complex and it's really fascinating, and that's why it is. It's really fascinating. But if you keep this idea of your approach and you know, and vision and seeing, I think it's very much about picture making.
Yes. Have you ever taken a photo and had people respond to it or think it was something completely different from what you intended to be photographing?
Yeah. I mean, you do get that, and that's part.
The relativity of perception and stuff.
Yeah, and that's well, again, that's one of the fascinations of photography too. And really, at the end of the day, the way we've responded to and captured that moment in time as well, and until the time we go through a very crafted process of getting a beautiful print on the gallery wall. You're really left at the will of the interpretation of the viewer, of course. Now, of course, everybody's different. Everybody's going to have different interpretations. So, if some sort of out there, I mean, hopefully we want to get some kind of universal meaning within our image too, as well.
Yes.
But if people, it's not necessarily that they don't get it. It's just that they have a very different interpretation, and that's fine. I think that's fine because, you know, if I gave them a camera, they'd certainly show me something very different too. So, I mean, I think it's about the interpretation of the viewer, which we all should take into account, and that's why I sort of really focus in that, you know, on my picture making, is that it is about life. Photography is about life.
Yes.
It is about something or someone. It is about life that it lies in front of us, and if we can respond to that in its in the simplest and most articulate essence of being able to capture that in a simplicity, then I think we've really we've done something special.
Now, let me ask you this: is seeing still believing in the world of today?
Interesting question, that one.
It is, isn't it?
Well, yes, very much so. And I think this is about, people have different beliefs in the medium of photography itself, and used to have different sayings, of course, that cameras can lie on that.
And, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
And a picture's worth, there's many sort of those examples, but I think the camera never lies, but I think photographers can be liars.
Very interesting distinction.
Yeah, because I think it's really to deal with that whole approach and what you want to bring to the work is, and as you know, that I'm essentially concerned with the truth. So that's why if ever I ever do the odd colour picture in that, there, I never put a polarizer filter on or any. I mean, I've got to see the way I see. I've got to photograph the way I see.
Yeah.
So this event or this place or this person has to be real. It has to be in front of me, so I have to present it the way that I saw it. For me, that's a real whole truth in that, and so I think it's the way you approach the whole thing of picture making that really is, and what you bring to it, of course, is really the important issue about truth in photography, and hopefully. And people will be able to respond to that. Yes.
Well, Ricky, tell us about the projects that you're involved with now, and your most favorite projects and stuff.
Okay. I'm currently involved in a project at the moment. It's the men's series, and it's called "Saddened by the Hearts of Many Men," and it deals with the health and well-being of Aboriginal men. So it talks, and really what I wanted to highlight the issue is about how men's roles in our communities and families has sort of been broken down over many years, and the fact that men's sort of well-being has never been looked at or and come to understood, and I'm really looking from the perspective too of what I've sort of felt deeper as an Aboriginal man, and that was about this this idea of this hidden trauma.
Yes.
And basically historical grief in a summary, but
because everyone would have that.
Oh yeah, that's right. And so over a period, and I always give the example of to men when I start talking about the project, about them participating, and they know this as well, but I just remind them to say, well, that when Cape Barren Island was a reservation in the 1940s and 50s, how men would return to the island sometimes drunk. It's because they probably just come from mutton birding and done 4 years of cultural mutton birding on the island, and had a day's on the grog in Lady Barren or something at the hotel to go back home to the island. But when they returned to the island drunk, of course the overseer took their land off them. So this is...
Was that a standard practice?
Series. I just use that as a very small example of the many things that's political legislative acts that's been imposed on Aboriginal people, and especially it's been imposed more on Aboriginal men.
So that was a thing. If they came back drunk, they could take their land.
Oh, well, they did. That's
just once.
What example? That would have happened to a few people, yeah.
But I mean, but if they just came back drunk once, not repeatedly.
No, just once, yeah.
Oh my God!
It was the attitude of the overseer at the time. They had that power, and they had that. And that's and I remember, I remember those stories, and they were true stories, and so I'll go back to this it's a very sort of deep and sensitive project in a way, and I'm very glad that the men probably a dozen men I've photographed so far have really supported this project wholeheartedly,
Yes.
100%, because they feel this.
Are
They feel
you?
this, and so that they know me as
You're a healer.
well, as an Aboriginal, well, as a man that I've grew up with them as well.
Yes.
And they trust me, and they know that I hopefully that they come to understand my integrity about the work itself and how I use the work, and which I always tell them.
Because you're one of them that's gone through the same thing. You can bring a photography would be a completely different thing than than a white person doing it.
Oh, very much so, very much so. And again, that lived experience of I can only photograph from that lived experience anyway, and informed lived experience. So yeah, it's quite a and it's only the beginning of the project really. That hopefully will go over another year. So I think long-term projects are much better, and it's a series of collaborations.
Yes.
It's about using some text of some story of a period of their life that they think they've been disabled because of this non-recognition or racism that's happened in their life that retarded the progress or their progress, and of course every black fella's got a story, so you can imagine some of the stories that they may have not told yet. So
Yes.
but it's still about it's an interesting project in the way we go about picturing ourselves too, because there's not only an element of self-awareness in that to come to us in the way we look at ourselves and picture ourselves, but also in that process, hopefully, and what I'm really hoping for is that it becomes part of a healing process as well.
Yes, well, it seems like that you're definitely facilitating the beginnings of the healing process just by you're helping it all to come out and come into awareness instead of being repressed and because a lot of people don't want to. It's painful to go back and think about all the bad stuff that's happened.
Sure is.
But it's not helping the healing process.
No, sure is, and again, it's I place 100% importance in the approach of the work itself and of me,
yes,
and the way I approach my work.
Your intent.
It has to be clear and truthful and honest, and so I'm after the honesty in these portraits. There's no fancy big studio lighting. It's one softbox and a travelling softbox that we set up within a plain background, and so I want this sort of honesty in the men and that sort of not being self-conscious about this sort of role, because many years ago I developed this approach of what was always an unequal act in picture making, where the photographer was the director, and from those, as I said, went back in the history about those colonial, what we refer to as a colonial camera. So I thought, we have to sort of balance that act now, where I say to people and develop that collaborative approach. I say to people I photograph, I say, this is just as much your picture as mine. So that we're trying to equal that, and I'll say, you respond to this camera the way you want to be presented. You present yourself the way you want to be presented. So we're getting back to this sort of equal relationship in the way Aboriginal people are presented. It's about them wanting to present them the way they want to be presented.
Yes. Are you taking much time to get to know these individual people?
I've known them.
Oh, they're people you've.
And
I see.
That's the thing about
that makes it totally different.
Yeah, and it's because, as I said, from that lived experience, this is where I first started investigating this, seeing the idea, because I could see it in my own community. I've seen it. So, and as usual. It was happening here, which it is. It's become a big national issue over the last 4 or 5 years, actually. So again, it's in that. It's a very important project, I think, to really highlight and create that understanding. So when it gets to the wider community, I've always said that, you know, if you really are going to judges, I really want you to, you know, you should understand us culturally before you even make any of those kind of judgments. So there's a whole lot of things that you simply don't know about Aboriginal people when they come to view these pictures and try to respond to them.
So I think that there would be a sense of unity among all the Aboriginal people all around Australia for what you're doing, because it applies to everybody.
Yeah.
And I can't see there be, you were talking before about the disagreements between like the Flinders Island organization and the larger one in Tasmania and kind of bureaucratic things, but I can't see any sort of conflict that you'd run into with what you're doing with this.
No. And most, as I said, it comes from their lived experiences. See?
Yes.
And Aboriginal communities, no matter where they are in Australia, whether down here in the deep south of Tasmania, on the islands here, or and as I experience in my many travels around the whole of Australia, whether it's happening up in the Northern Territory or the far north of Queensland, or wherever it may be, these are always national. Whatever's happening up in those communities, you can almost guarantee is happening in these communities.
Yes.
And that's because as Aboriginal people, we function and think very differently culturally. We function very differently as a community. So when our understanding of our cultural network, or our cultural community, whatever's going on there, because of our core values, that is why if things are happening here, you can almost guarantee they're happening in the Northern Territory.
Can you
because of that functioning of a community.
Can you express in words, contrast what's happening, the nature of these community, your community process versus the ones of the civilized white society or something like that? Like, what are they? What's the dynamic that is it more? It's more like a true sense of community because the deeper connection between the people and stuff.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the way an Aboriginal community functions very differently to what most people would think.
Yes.
We have these big there's systems of knowledge. There's structures of big kinships, of family networks, and special relationships with place and certain land on a certain part, our country.
Mm-hmm.
So we function very differently, so when you get down to those core values of the way how culture is, which existed in those sort of knowledge systems and solidarity of a big network of kinship and cultural beliefs that kept us so solid. And based on some of those core values are also upon that of caring and sharing.
Yes.
So those are the very things that's been responsible for our survival. And after photographing for some 25 years in communities all over Australia, of whether it's up north, east, west, or down here in south, it's all the same. We have this incredible inbuilt survival mechanism that I simply call that indomitable spirit. And in the face of all adversity, we still have this ability to get together and to laugh together and to be together, and the gathering, our gathering, is a very, very important part of our culture.
Absolutely. And I think what inspired me to ask that kind of question is because of, say, like if we were moving a step ahead and we were filming a show that was going to be designed to try to inspire the white Australians and the wider community to be aware of what it is that they're missing and what they need to learn about, where do they start? What are these? If we were actively trying to re-educate the people about the reality and the truth of Aboriginal communities and indigenous Australians, what are the where do you actually start?
Well, yeah, that's a big question, and you know, whether it's a lack of effort on their part of not wanting to know about truth and history, or is it a fact that they were completely part of a huge propaganda machine, which is true also. Yeah, I mean, it'd have to be a mixture, because there is this inherent racism in Australia, which is the very reason why it's one of the most racist countries in the world, and quite famous for it. You know, internationally.
Did people in America, when you've gone there, are people aware of that in America that you know?
No, not really. But I mean, it was surprising too, though. But recently, I've come to from people that are actually sort of maybe deal in international studies or relations, or a certain department, or people as part of you know, another sort of system of knowledge over there. What's happened is that I've noticed that there's a lot more people now, certainly more aware, and actually do comment to me that I didn't realise Australia was so racist, and so they have that knowledge now. Mm-hmm. They have that knowledge, so they comment to me to say that yeah, I'm aware of the racism in Australia, that what they do to the indigenous people.
And along with that, do they express an interest in wanting to know more about what the reality is and stuff? Yeah. Then obviously what's going to come up is the parallels between that and the plight of the Native Americans too, which is very parallel and very similar.
Yeah, very much so. And there's for decades there's been a great exchange between Native Americans and Australian Aboriginal people. Because of their similar histories, of course. Yeah, that's and we have a long relationship. Everyone was over there last time. We met some Native American people who've become very good friends with, and that sort of thing. So that's again an ongoing thing. When we go back, we'll go back and see them. And
what tribe are they from?
It's from Arizona.
Oh, are they Hopi?
No, not Hopi.
Navajo?
Navajo.
Okay.
Yeah, Navajo.
I've been on their reservation before.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Beautiful land there.
Yeah.
Did you go to their reservation?
No, I didn't get up to Arizona.
Okay.
I always wanted to sort of get up that way in you know, the Midwest.
Just to sum up here for a few minutes. So, where are we in this era?
Where are we in this era? Our period of history, and where do we sit? That's a question I've been asking myself for some time now, and I suppose after a sort of a lifetime of work, you really start to question that, and naturally. But as a Aboriginal documentary photographer anyway, I can give you sort of an insight to that. In 1993, when I had done the prison project in relation to Aboriginal deaths in custody and the overpopulation of Aboriginal people in prisons, I remember saying at the opening of that particular exhibition that I hope in 10 years we may have changed some social attitudes towards putting Aboriginal people into prisons. To the extent that what it is, and incredible numbers of people in prisons, and as a result, a very serious matter of Aboriginal people dying in prisons, and being killed in prisons as well.
Like Robert Walker.
Yeah, then that really is about Aboriginal deaths in custody. So some 20 years on, the situation in fact has increased.
What's the percentage of the prison population in Australia that's Aboriginal?
It's probably around about 28%.
Really?
Yeah.
But that's compared to the percentage of the population.
Yeah.
It's
we only represent 3% of the population nationally, and so that's incredible. That's just off the show, really. But anyway, so progressively, I'm trying to work out what's happened and the progress of that, and very little has changed really in 20 odd years of photographing Aboriginal issues and where we sit in this place of time, and So it's a very worrying time too. But I mean, as far as I can do as a creative professional in a way, and as an Aboriginal man, is hopefully make you know, the path ahead clearer, and then I'll give a very honest interpretation to who we are as a people in this particular era. So that knowledge can be you know, worked upon in the future. So that's the way I see my role. But I do fear that it'll be far more generations ahead than I suspect.
I think, but we do have hope, because we there is the everyone does have creativity, and the work that you're doing is so inspiring. Like, to me, it's so inspiring to meet you and to hear about what you're doing. And I haven't even really seen much of your photography yet, which I'm really excited to. But I'll stop for now. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. We'll take it up again. We'll continue.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.